What's up, everybody? Today I wanted to propose to you one simple question. One question only. Does the game of Custom Robo sound familiar to anyone? If not, I'll give you a small little snippet.
And now for something completely different.
In case you don't know, this game came out in 2004, was just for the GameCube. And for me, may not for you, was one of the most important game releases of that year alongside all the other games that came out of that year. In case you don't know, 2004 had a ton of games that came out that year that are so numerous I can barely name all of them. And the sheer gravity of that year is astounding. Like, probably the biggest year of game releases may have been 1998. And from this single game, it shaped a lot of what I like to play, a lot of what I like to watch, and what really was not necessarily the story. The story is fine. It's perfectly fine. What stuck out to me was the gameplay and how similar it is to a lot of other games of its type that I really like. For example, these days there aren't very many games like Custom Robo. Custom Robo did get a release in 2007. It kind of got overshadowed by a lot of other things, though. So I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't heard of this, its sequel, or even the one that was released in Japan or just in general, because apparently the series released in the Nintendo 64 years. I didn't know that going in. The box art just spoke to me, and I wanted to play it so bad. So I got a Blockbuster. Wow, I feel old. And well, I rented that for a week, and I fell in love with the game. When I had some allowance money and I found it at a store. I don't remember which store. I spent my money like crazy for that. And this shaped me to play other games of its type. Like, top of my head, there's Gundam Breaker 3, which has a very similar playstyle, although it's more of a visual novel for narrative purposes, whereas this is kind of similar to it. And the sequel, Custom Robo Arena, also has a similar visual novel style, which is probably why I was really attracted to Gundam Breaker 3. But before I played Gundam Breaker 3, I had to deal with its sequel. And its sequel, oh my goodness. Oh, that sequel still gives me nightmares to this day because I was so disappointed.
Oh my goodness!
No, 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 no! Come on, come on, come on! Yes, hello? Can I get some help with... Okay, I just need to do that. Okay.
2,000 years later.
Ugh. It may have not taken that long, but it certainly felt like it. Luckily, I did get a couple numbers from this cartoonish tech support, but I had to do it in this particular fashion first.
Time to call a friend! I summon you! It didn't work, man! I'm still alive, motherfucker!
God damn it! Okay, this means war. The line I was talking to gave me another number. Let's try this one. Let's see if it actually works. I'm getting sick and tired of seeing this game. Let's give it what it deserves.
Time to call a friend! I summon you!
Okay, now that that's settled, let's get to the actual meat and potatoes of the video of the day. And maybe I won't go insane thinking about that game that I will not talk about anymore. So here we go. Our story starts at the beginning, in the past, where the main character is seeing off his father. You don't know who this guy is, but he gives the main character a special watch and asks him to never take it off. It doesn't sound like much, but it will come into play later, obviously, if you know any good storytelling. And after this flashback, you cut to the present day in the far-off future of whenever. You never know how far into the future it is. It's implied to be a few centuries later, supposedly. And you're introduced to Lucy, the main character's... she's the manager of the apartment complex that you live at. And you talk to her and you find out through dialogue that you received a letter from your long-lost father asking you to become a commander, being his last will, per se. And Lucy name drops the people you want to go work for, the Steelhearts crew, or she calls it Steel Horse. And after you're introduced to Lucy, who does play some of a role in the game, she's not that big of a player of the whole thing, though. But after you are introduced to that, you make your way to the Steelhearts bounty hunter office and are introduced to two main characters, one of which is called Harry, who will be your primary exposition dump for tutorials, and the typical funny guy who likes to swoon over almost any pretty girl he has his eyes on, with some exceptions. And then he's fine. He's okay. He can be pretty funny, but he's a very full of himself individual who does have a good heart of gold, typical character of that type and of that era, because this game did come out in 2004, so there were probably differences with a lot of characters. And then there's Ernest, the boss. He can be pretty funny. He looks rough and everything, but he really cares about the employees under his care, especially if he can get arrested, because you find out that if you don't have a license for your job involving custom robos, the employer can be arrested because of it. So he can be pretty funny too, and his interactions with the rest of the cast are pretty hilarious. And although they're interested in hiring you, he can't hire you due to money constraints. Apparently they don't get a lot of business. And so during this time, your first mission is brought up, where you go to the Custom Robo Research Center and meet Linda, the head researcher, on a project called the Ray 01, which is a experimental robo that hasn't even met circulation yet. And after having your first battle, having your big info dump on how to play the game and all that, you stop the burglars and are congratulated and are formally recommended to join the Steelhearts crew. And that's kind of how the first day goes. And after that, there are... Well, it's mostly tutorial for the first couple hours of the game. Because the next day, you're introduced to the training gym, where you get more experience, you're introduced to more parts, and more styles of how to play the game. And while you're at the gym, you're then called over to the local park, and where you have to stop these idiots fighting over a girl who's kind of a ditz and leaves in the middle. And you're formally introduced to Marcia, who is the final member of the Steelhearts crew and has a bit more of an interesting backstory to herself. But you don't really find out much about her until a little bit later. And after that, and going back to the office, you find out that the hero doesn't have a license to do it at all. So you have to get a license. So the next day, you go with Harry and you get a license to actually use robos in the bounty hunter setting and can actually do your job without doing illegal activities. shortly after you get your license, you go the following day back to the office, and then are tasked to go back to your house, where there was a scuffle going on between the couple living next door to you. Apparently, while leaving, when going home with Harry, he dropped a note from a gal he was flirting with and got her number, and that caused a scuffle with the couple. After finally stopping their rampage of being loudly yelling and causing a massive social disturbance, which apparently wasn't big enough for the police to handle, go figure. Marcia comes in at the end, and it's shown that she has kind of a softer side with kids her age, and that she did have a brother at one point that disappeared. And you don't find out who he is for a good while. But finding out more about her helps, and you also find out a bit more about Harry, especially because he's the one that caused this problem. It's not going to be a recurring thing with him, but he can be a troublemaker with some things. But shortly after this, you are then called over to a cafe called Bodhi's Cafe by Ernest, who apparently saw a criminal, a very wanted criminal called Marv, and this is where you're formally introduced to another character called Evil, with a capital E. He's a total egomaniac who works with a rival bounty hunter association called Dark Blue, which apparently you wanted to get a job for. You can answer however you want, but the typical answer would probably be, I was desperate for a job. Go figure. And Evil, he's kind of a minor antagonist. He's not that important to the overall story until a little bit later. But after going to Bodhi's Cafe and finding out that the Dark Blue guys there, like Evil, already captured Marv, you just go back home and are woken up to a call to go to a restaurant called Diamonds. And apparently the restaurant had an encounter with an autonomous robo that killed a commander that had been I think eating there. But this is where you're also introduced to Mira, Harry's older sister, and Roy, Mira's underling, and well, yeah. And this is where you're also introduced to another thing about Marcia, her ability to half dive. It's an ability that lets her dive into another person's robo, see what they last saw, or at least feel what they last felt, pretty much their entire cognition before their apparent death, or just when they don't have their cue. It's something that really takes a lot out of her and made her a subject to a lot of discrimination against what happened with other people. Apparently she was experimented on. But you find out that this autonomous robo isn't a typical one. Like, it's not mechanical. It barely looks like it could be a robo at all. But following that, you just head back home and are left to contemplate that for the remainder of the evening. But luckily, it doesn't end there. You actually get a call to go back to Bodhi's Cafe, and apparently he holds a gambling ring in the back of the cafe. And This is where you go through multiple battles and eventually encounter one of the Z Syndicate. That's Z like zoo. And apparently the Z Syndicate is a terrorist organization that's bent on something. It's never really explained completely, but while you're there, you also meet a blue-haired individual who keeps looking ominously over the entire thing. And after your encounter with Shiner, who apparently has been winning and winning and winning, you find out about them through that. And after you defeat Shiner, they all leave after being exposed for being the Z Syndicate. Ooh. After that, you go to a local tournament to get more experience. Not much really happens there. You beat everybody. Harry comes out looking like a fool because he's not full-on egomaniac, but he's very close to that. The story continues when you get a call and go to Steelhearts and find out that the research center has been being bombarded with thefts or just attacks. So you're tasked to go there and investigate and stop whoever may or may not be attacking. And you then are introduced to more of the Z Syndicate, particularly Eliza, who also introduces the first illegal parts of the game. Now, illegal parts are kind of like standard parts, except that they are a lot more powerful than the typical ones, making them very unbalanced, uneven, and very dangerous to use on other people. Hence why they're called illegal parts. And with her, you're introduced to that part of the game. Illegal parts aren't going to become available to you until much later, but they are something to keep an eye out on, especially because of how annoyingly powerful they can be if you're not familiar with how they can function or how damaging they can be. But after the incident at the research center occurs, you get a call back to Bodhi's Cafe, where some robo is attacking the cafe, at least the gambling center, and is causing a total mess of the place. Now, when you first see it, it doesn't look like it's a robotic being at all. And it turns out this is the same being that Marcia sees in the half-dive from earlier, but it looks slightly different. This is the main enemy of the game, the main antagonist called Rahu. Now, specifically, this is Rahu 1. And this creature is extremely dangerous and causes a ton of damage for the human race. And you also find out that the environment that you fight Rahu in is not like the typical Holocenians. It feels like real grass, real air, real everything, like our typical world. But this starts to spark some interest in how the world works, because apparently the grass is not like our grass. It's plastic, and there isn't regular air like blue skies and everything. It starts to tell you a little more things about the world that you're playing in. Now, after you defeat Rahu, you encounter another of the Z Syndicate called Oboro, who is kind of a maniacal he's power hungry. He wants to use Rahu's power for himself in order to gain absolute authority over all. And you're also introduced to supposedly Marcia's long-lost brother, the blue-haired dude I mentioned a little bit ago. And in an attempt to stop them, you are able to defeat them, but they are still able to get away with themselves. Rahu is able to wake up and is able to run away in the scuffle. But after the scuffle, you find out that supposedly the police department, or at least Mira, Harry's sister, and Linda know more about Rahu. Technically, you're not supposed to know the name of this being, but it's not the first time that's been seen, which is also suspicious. The following day, seemingly out of the blue, the police department decided to hold a massive community tournament, which apparently was very unheard of until this point. Now, you're invited to go, and so you go with Harry and Marcia and participate and fight with a lot of the police department, including Roy and Mira. You do win, and Marcia, throughout the whole thing, is distraught over finding out that her brother was not long lost at all. And Harry pretty much tells her, your brother is gone, you need to move on and actually look at the people that really care about you in the now and not care about somebody who isn't there. Which, I may be oversimplifying it, or I may not completely understand it, but that seemingly knocks her out of her funk, and she starts to open up little by little from this point on. She even fights with you against Ernest and Linda, who were also invited to the tournament. But after you win the tournament, that's when more things start to happen. But before all that happens, following the tournament, you are formally invited to go to Harry and Mira's house to have a celebratory dinner, essentially, where you find out more about Harry and his sister, and you also find out about the main character's family, and more about the watch that he wears. Or I should say you, because you are playing the character. But, tomato, tomato, whichever. After that little deviation, and also one of the few times you actually see anybody in this game ever eat, the story picks up again. The following day, you're then asked to go back to the police headquarters and participate in a lot of trials. Seemingly it's a test. You don't really understand what's going on, but they're testing you and Mira, you, Marcia, and Harry through back-to-back battles. You happen to get more battles than the rest because the old geezer of the police chief gets fired up and wants to actually fight you, because apparently you are the type of character that can do that. But after you beat all these battles and are able to progress further, then you're introduced to another portion of the game that pushes the story even more. After your final fight with the police chief, you find out that this has been a giant test to see whether any of you or if none of you are Class S license material. Because the license system works from D to A on the typical fashion, Class S is a special licensing that only a select few have, which apparently is not normal. It's a very secretive class and is only given to a select few for a very few reasons. One of the reasons, like I mentioned, will be coming up. After you go to the testing center and are given your formal Class S licensing, you find out that the main test subject was Rahu 1 itself. And apparently that this being had been around for a long time, and there is some information dropped that the Rahu that you encountered and the one that you encountered earlier aren't completely the same, but that this being is much older than you would think. And the reason that you're given a Class S license is so that you can learn all this information, because it's highly classified, even to the levels of government echelons that you can never see the light of day a lot of the time. But after achieving Class S, you're given the option to go back home, because all the information that's being given is at the tail end of a day. But you get a call from Daimon the following day, and apparently when you get there, Evil is fighting Rahu, and Rahu has seemingly gotten stronger, but Evil's able to knock it out, essentially. And it's also revealed that Evil is also similar to Roy in one other way, where he's a big simp for Eliza, the Z Syndicate woman that you encountered at the break-in at the lab. Apparently, Evil was also helping get them in. But when Eliza comes up, she seemingly doesn't recognize Evil and doesn't remember any sort of promises that was given to him. And that, well, he kind of deserves it, because it's Evil. Evil's kind of an ass. And so Eliza tries to fight you over the Rahu. You beat her, and because she becomes exhausted, she threatens to turn off the safety switch. Apparently, the Robos have a safety switch that can limit how much power they can output so they don't hurt somebody. Although she's using illegal parts, so it's kind of like, before she could do anything else, Oboro and Marcia's brother, who is then revealed to be Sergei, come into the scene, and she leaves because she can't handle three opponents at the same time. And after a scuffle with Oboro and Sergei, you're able to beat them, but they are still able to get away with Rahu with a smoke bomb and
Smoke bomb!
ninja vanish time, essentially. And that's how it ends there, right before you go to the police station. Now, when you get to the police station, you tell them what your encounter right before then, and then you also find out a few interesting things about the world. That, for example, the world is flat, and the world ends at the wall. There is nothing beyond the wall. That's what's taught at the schools in this universe, that the dome is where anything and everything ends. There is nothing beyond it. And that the world is flat. It's flat Earth. Okay. But you also find out that the world isn't always like that, or wasn't like that. A few centuries prior to the series' start, Rahu apparently had attacked all the human civilization that lived in the outside world, which caused them to create the Dome City and pretty much shut themselves off. And with Rahu coming back, it raises a lot of concerns about what could be going on. And then you're exposed to the outside world, and the outside world is a total wasteland. Yeah, this isn't what you think it is. It's a dystopian future type game. And when I first played this, I was very surprised to find that out. But with that drop, you go back home, and then when you go back to the office, Ernest has a job request from the police department, and he's reluctant to send the three of you on the mission because of how sketchy it is. Now, the reason it's sketchy is because he's not a Class S license holder, so he can't know all the classified information that the three of you now know. After reluctantly letting the three of you go on the mission, you go back to the police headquarters and begin the mission to go pretty much raid the Z Syndicate, because their base is also out in the outside world, which is why they're so difficult to track. After making your way back into the outside world area of the game, Roy had apparently been scouting the area and found where supposedly Z Syndicate's home base is, and you begin your raid on the base of the Z Syndicate, eventually leading to when you find the Rahu again, and apparently had been upgraded by the Z Syndicate's scientists, and you find out that Oboro wants to control Rahu itself. And this is also when you find out that when you begin to fight Sergey and Oboro, you find out that Sergey is actually a double agent of sorts and betrays Oboro and helps you and Marcia defeat him, which makes him desperate enough to try to use Rahu in now a more evolved form against the two of you. Now, because Rahu is also a living being of some sort, it's weakened, and you're able to beat it and knock Obora out, and Rahu does escape, unfortunately. But you find out that Sergey hasn't been working for Oboro or Eliza either. You find out that he's been working for the original leader of the Z Syndicate. Now this is where the big twist comes in. After being reunited with the rest of the group, Sergey takes you to the inner sanctum for the Z Syndicate's leader, where it's revealed that the Z Syndicate's leader is none other than your father, who recently died and had left you the last will to become a commander. He apparently was a high official with the local government and found out about Rahu through them. But after finding out, he became kind of concerned about the eventual return, if at all, of Rahu. And you also find out that the watch is not an ordinary watch. It's actually a device called a memory erasure device that was used to defeat Rahu the first time, too. It apparently has the ability to stop it from evolving. It's apparently able to evolve very quickly, in a sense, and as it consumes more emotions, because it's fueled on dark emotions like anger, greed, and the like. It can take those in and evolve further and make itself stronger. It apparently wanted to eradicate all human life when it first arrived. But the interesting thing is, it was an invisible being. It didn't really have anything that you could see. But then, for some reason, it decided to dive into a seemingly senseless children's toy, which turned out to be a Custom Robo. And after it dived into it, it seemingly got stuck. And what you see is its stuck form. It's why it looks like a techno-organic monstrosity. But when this happened, the government saw an opportunity to finally take it down. So they weaponized all the custom robos of the time and were able to weaken it to the point of using the memory erasure device, which put it into a hibernation-like state. This was several centuries ago, and Rahu was not destroyed. And in order to keep the secret of Rahu secret, they decided to erase everyone's memories of Rahu and the outside world after the Dome City had been finished. And then they locked themselves up, and it seemingly halted humanity's progression. And so the final mission is to go and defeat Rahu before it can evolve further and cause harm to the human race once again. After making your way through the amusement park that apparently Rahu had been sleeping at, you encounter Eliza once again and her twin sister, pretty much a mirror twin, Isabella. And it's supposed to be kind of a twist, which I guess it is if you don't see it coming from a mile away.
This? And the answer is dull surprise!
And after you defeat Eliza and Isabella, you go and encounter Rahu, who had evolved further into the Rahu 3. And this is a battle that, oof, it's tough. Rahu 3 is very tough, which is why it introduces a very different gameplay mechanic that you're probably not going to see very much of in a game of this type, where it's a 3-on-1. And before the battle starts, you use the memory erasure device, which seemingly stops Rahu's evolution in its tracks right then. In a retaliation tactic, it tries to attack the three characters, Harry, you, and Marcia. And when you dive, you finally fight, and after a grueling time of battle and a lot of tough... This is a very tough fight. You'll probably be defeated maybe once, like I was. But after you defeat Rahu is seemingly destroyed permanently and forever. And after you defeat Rahu, you go back to the Z Syndicate hideout, where Sergei reveals that there is another audio recording from your father in the event that you defeated Rahu permanently, asking you to not keep this a secret from the general public anymore, to keep all these secrets, the outside world, Rahu, everything, to come out to the public and try to have humanity start moving forward again. And Mira says that this is probably something that's above their pay grade, essentially. But everybody agrees that it should not be kept a secret anymore. She does say that she agrees too, and they go back home. And that's the end of the primary story of the game. After the credits roll, you're dropped back into the game where the grand battle begins. It's pretty much a bunch of tournaments that give you the ability to get more of the parts again. You're also introduced to the ability to play the game over again through New Game Plus, if you really want to. New Game Plus just gives you the ability to play through the entire story again, but with all the parts you had unlocked at that point in time. For story-wise, the Grand Battle doesn't have much going on. It's just kind of a relaxing time with different stipulations for the game, which introduces more of the gameplay mechanics throughout that you've seen through the game. For example, you get more 2 versus 2 battles. You get 2 on 1 battles. Then you get battle royales. Then there's different part limits. For example, you get single use, which means if you use a part aside from late parts, then you can't use that again throughout that tournament. The reason the late parts are an exception is because there's not that many late parts in the game. There's probably about 8 in comparison to the massive library of other parts. And this gives you more push to experiment with other parts throughout the game. Now, the story continues more so after you complete all the tournaments, get all the trophies, including gold. And it concludes in the final area of the story, Rahu's Lair, where you fight everybody else and find out that despite supposedly being told that everyone that was Class S was demoted to Class D, which is the lowest, and would have to work up to it, it turns out you were the only one that was demoted to Class D. Because they wanted to train you to be the best commander out of all of them. Which I guess is fine. It's kind of a dick move, in my opinion. But after you beat them all, with Harry being the final opponent, which he technically was... No, he wasn't your first opponent. Never mind. After beating Harry, that's when you get the post credits scene and get the title card of the game. And if you completed all of the Grand Battle and get gold and everything, you're able to unlock the final Robo of the game, which is the Ray Warrior, which it's really fun to play with. And you can also find the Chicken Heart, which is a literal chicken. And the Grand Battle introduces a lot of legal parts, including the Ray Legend, which is apparently the one that your father used prior to his death. But for story, the Grand Battle is not that important, but it is a very nice expansion to the base game. But you don't have to play it to get more story. It's just there for fun. Now, if I didn't bring up the gameplay throughout the main story synopsis, it's because the gameplay is something that you can understand relatively without much information into it. The basics of the game are you customize your Robo with multiple parts. You get bombs, pods, leg parts, and guns. There are multiple guns. There are multiple Robos with different classes. There's at least 3 per class. For example, with the Ray 01, it's part of the Shining Fighter. Then there's Metal Grapplers. Then there's the illegal parts that fall in the other class. They're not really the same as others. And then the guns, all the guns do something different. Well, most of them. And the bombs are all different, as they follow a similar pattern with the guns, where they can all do something different. And then there's the pods, which go on the back, and they add more versatility to a robo. And then there's the leg parts, which mostly alter how your robo moves, and they can do different things as well. There are some similar specs to them, but how you customize your robo is all up to you. There are so many combinations to this game that it is fun to experiment, which is why when you get to the grand battle, you are encouraged to experiment with all the parts that you may or may not have used. My favorite combination is Rail 1, Shotgun, Geotrap Bomb for the bombs, the Reflection Pod, and the Formula Blades. And the Formula Blades make the robo move much faster on the ground. But that's for my favorite legal parts. With illegal parts, it has a lot more options. But aside from the Grand Battle, you don't get any penalties from them. In Grand Battle, you get penalties with illegal parts by getting less scores, since they are pretty much the OP God mode of the game. Technically, they are still balanced in a way that they aren't that overpowering, because I'll tell you this, I got my ass handed to me so many times when I thought I had the upper hand because I wasn't paying attention. This game will mess you up if you do not take it seriously. I lost maybe 10 times out of all the course of the game, but it's just fun to customize and experiment with all the different types of parts that are in this game. It's insane, all the variety that there is. But aside from the customizing, what else is to this game, you may ask? Well, there's also the different types of play styles where you can do the standard 1v1s. Then there's tag battles, which have you switch between a robo and another one that you have, which is still a one-on-one. You don't see it in anything else other than the grand battle, I believe. And then there's 2v2, which you play with another person against a team of two. Then there is a 2-on-1, where you fight against two other computers, or you and a computer fight against one. And then there's the Battle Royale, where it's everyone versus everyone. And aside from the Rahu 3 battle, you don't really see a 3-on-1 battle. I think that's probably the only 3-on-1 in the entirety of the game. I may be wrong, though. And, of course, there's also the New Game Plus, where you just play through the original story again, including all the tutorial speak, all that fun stuff, and just relive the entire story with all the parts you unlocked up to that point. Now, if you didn't unlock the illegal parts in the Grand Battle, you can't unlock them in the standard story mode. They are exclusive to the Grand Battle, especially because you can only find some in Grand Battle. You actually have to look and find some of them, like the Chicken Heart, the Ray Legend, and the Rahu series are ones that you have to find. But that's kind of it for the gameplay. The gameplay is very simple, but deeply complex once you really dig into it. But in all honesty, Although this game did come out in a year that was very highly prolific with a ton of different games, this is one that really stuck with me. And playing through it again, I had a lot of fun with it. Yeah, it's very basic storytelling, but the story is serviceable. It gets you going. It's still interesting to play through. The tutorial speed can be a little grating, but it does teach you the fundamentals of the game so you can get better with it. And can the part system that only gives you certain parts out only at certain intervals be annoying? Yes. This is fixed in Custom Robo Arena, where you can continuously play against other CPUs, earn money, and buy more parts when they become available. That's a little bit nicer than this piecemealing of parts that this game had. But I would highly suggest you play this game if this sounds interesting at all. But if this does sound interesting, at least the style of it, but you don't want to play this particular game, there are a few suggestions I could give. Such as Mass Builder, which is available on Steam. It has a similar play style to probably Armored Core, but it has a deep customization scheme similar to Custom Robo. But it's more so because you can actually customize a lot more than just the weapons. You can actually customize the robot itself. And then there's Gundam Breaker 3, which is my personal favorite of almost any game at all, which is pretty much a model builder sim with Gundams, and it's a Dynasty Warriors style game, but you get a ton of different options with weapons, armors, customization options, and the story is pretty simple too, but it's still pretty fun. And then there's obviously the sequel, Custom Robo Arena. Well, it's not really a sequel. It's the next in line game that released a few years later. It also has a simpler story. It's a little bit better, less tutorial speak, and it refines a lot of what made the GameCube version work, just on the DS. And it also introduced a couple of new mechanics that weren't in the GameCube version. And I would definitely not recommend New Gundam Breaker. Don't even touch that with the 10-foot pole if you can. Oh, great, I mentioned it. I had to pull the number again, don't I? And then there's also, I didn't play much of it, but it is available on PC and Nintendo Switch, Demon Ex Machina, or Daemon Ex Machina. It's more of a spiritual successor to Armored Core, but the customization is very reminiscent of the Custom Robo games, which I really like. And then there's another one that I haven't had a chance to really play yet, but from what I've seen, it has a very similar play style to the Robo games and the previous ones I mentioned, called Project Nimbus. Now, this is also on Steam. I wouldn't get it full price. I would definitely get it on sale like I did. It has some issues with running, and that's why I can't fully recommend it. And then there's obviously the new Gundam game, Gundam Evolution. Now, obviously, it's more similar to Overwatch, but it's still a fun game that can give you more customization too. This is a game that I have played multiple times. I've completed it multiple times. For this video, I completed it. Well, except for maybe one thing, but it's a Coliseum, which I don't really consider this one part of the completion criteria, because you have to complete multiple versus battles, not story or grand battles, in order to even get. And if any of what I have said, anything I have described, has remotely interested you, I would highly recommend you go and play this. Although you would have to, I don't know, a certain dolphin will be helpful with that kind of endeavor if you decide to go and play that. What are you doing? I'm done. Go home. Oh, were you expecting me to just do a shout out to my channel? Well, this is what I got. Goodbye. See ya. Like, comment, subscribe.